There were photos shown of Celeste's decomposed body found in the trunk of David's car.
All the way through the car, in the center console, the front cabin, the back cabin, and the back seats, inside the front, inside the bag, it was littered with air fresheners. The guy had put air fresheners everywhere.
Of where you can see her body with her head and like her arms are gone, and it looks like she's face down, but it's so, she's so, what's it called, deteriorated that you couldn't really see, but her head was down here, and it almost looked like she had a strap type of thing here. The color of her body, this is so hard to talk about. It was actually so upsetting too, because I'm sitting right by the parents and I'm hearing all this stuff and I'm seeing the parents react, and it makes me want to cry. Like, at one point the judge, or like
Over the first 2 days of D4vd's preliminary hearing, the court has heard testimony from multiple witnesses, offering the public its clearest look yet at the evidence investigators have spent months assembling in the case of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. The hearing began with testimony that took the court back to February 2024, when deputies first visited David Burke's home during a welfare check after Celeste was reported missing. From there, investigators walked through the discovery inside Burke's Tesla in September 2025, along with the digital evidence they say helped reconstruct the timeline of the investigation. Over the second day of the hearing, additional witnesses introduced financial records, forensic examinations of Burke's Tesla, and evidence recovered during the search of his residence. The prosecution's first witness was Los Angeles County Sheriff's Senior Deputy Juan Gonzalez, who testified about an encounter that happened more than a year before Celeste's remains were found. On February 17, 2024, Gonzalez responded to David Burke's home after Riverside County investigators requested a welfare check. When deputies spoke with Burke, he told them he had met Celeste through social media and Discord in either 2020 or 2021. He said they had only met once in person and claimed he believed she was 18 years old because, in his words, "She told me she was 18. Burke also told deputies that the last time he had spoken with Celeste was on February 13, 2024, and that he had not seen her in person since November 12, 2023. One detail from Gonzalez's testimony stood out in court. The court was also told that Burke had kept both the yearbook photograph and the missing person flyer on his phone. Investigators later recovered body camera footage showing him pulling up those images as he spoke with deputies, using them while answering questions about Celeste's disappearance. During the welfare check, Burke showed deputies a 6th grade yearbook photograph of Celeste, along with a missing person flyer. The yearbook photo showed Celeste wearing a Batman sweatshirt and appearing much younger than the age Burke claimed he believed she was. During that search, Gonzalez noticed several Hello Kitty-themed items inside the residence. Burke explained that it was an artist house where different people frequently stayed, suggesting the items did not necessarily belong to him. The court was also shown body camera footage from that welfare check. Burke answered the door alone and appeared relaxed, casually eating chips while speaking with deputies. During the conversation, he told investigators that he had only met Celeste once in person.
Vance, I used to bodyguard for him, bro. I was bodyguarding for him in 2022.
After first getting to know her through Discord, he provided her phone number, showed officers a school yearbook photograph stored on his phone, and said, "Somebody sent me a yearbook photo. She says she's 18. I heard she's 13. Throughout the interaction, Burke remained cooperative and spoke with investigators in a calm, conversational tone. Throughout the exchange, Burke consistently told deputies that he believed Celeste was an adult. That explanation remained central to his account during the welfare check, and would later become one of the key issues revisited as the case progressed. During cross-examination, Burke's attorney focused on his cooperation with law enforcement that day. Gonzalez confirmed that Burke voluntarily answered questions, shared information about Celeste, consented to the search of his home, and consistently maintained that he believed she was 18 years old. The prosecution's second witness was LAPD robbery homicide detective Joshua Byers, one of the lead investigators on the case. His testimony shifted the courtroom from the early stages of the investigation to September 2025, when everything changed. Detective Byers testified that on September 8, 2025, investigators responded to a Hollywood tow yard after employees reported a strong odor coming from a black Tesla registered to David Burke. By the second day of the hearing, LAPD criminalists provided additional testimony about what they encountered while processing that same vehicle. They described a strong odor consistent with human decomposition, widespread insect activity inside the front trunk, and numerous air fresheners placed throughout different areas of the Tesla.
All the way through the car, in the center console, the front cabin, the back cabin, and the back seats, inside the front, inside the bag, it was littered with air fresheners. The guy had put air fresheners everywhere.
Investigators opened the Tesla's front trunk. Inside were 2 body bags. The first contained a partially dismembered torso and head, while the second contained both arms and legs, which had been separated into multiple pieces. Detective Byers testified that several blue plastic fibers appeared to be embedded within some of the cut surfaces, a detail investigators documented during the forensic examination. Inside were dismembered human remains. The court was shown photographs taken during the search. Detective Byers walked through each image, explaining what investigators observed at the scene. Several reporters later said the photographs were extremely difficult to look at because of the condition of the remains.
I couldn't really see, but her head was down here, and it almost looked like she had a strap type of thing here. The color of her body, this is so hard to talk about. It was actually...
Criminalist Chelsea Murillo later testified that investigators documented maggots and dead flies inside the front trunk while processing the vehicle. She also told the court that multiple air fresheners were recovered from different locations throughout the Tesla, including inside the front trunk itself, where some were covered with insect activity and decomposition fluids. Byers testified that investigators recovered a torso, a head, and multiple severed limbs from inside the body bag. Due to the advanced stage of decomposition, he explained that the victim's face could not be visually identified because of what is medically known as skin slippage, a condition that can occur during decomposition. He also testified that the victim's left ring finger and left pinky finger had been amputated, along with the right index finger, the same finger that investigators would later associate with Burke's tattoo. Another detail mentioned during testimony involved small blue plastic or fiber fragments embedded in some of the cut surfaces of the remains, including near one of the kneecaps. While this evidence was being presented, the courtroom remained largely silent. Many of the reporters covering the hearing later described the photographs as some of the most graphic they had seen in a courtroom. Several admitted they had to look away from the courtroom monitors during parts of the presentation. One observation, however, was mentioned repeatedly by people inside the courtroom throughout the presentation of the crime scene photographs. Burke remained focused on the courtroom monitors and did not appear to look away as the images were displayed. Detective Byers' testimony marked the first time the public heard a detailed account of what investigators found inside the Tesla. The following day, forensic specialists expanded on that testimony by explaining how the Tesla was processed. They described the chemical testing used during the examination, documented several reddish stains inside the vehicle that produced presumptive positive reactions for possible blood, and noted that additional laboratory testing would be required to determine exactly what those stains were. It also established the starting point for the forensic investigation that followed. From there, the focus of the hearing shifted away from the crime scene itself and toward the digital evidence. Investigators spent months collecting to reconstruct what happened before the remains were ever discovered. Investigators also recovered a USB flash drive from the Tesla's glove compartment. Its contents were not discussed during the hearing, and no additional details about the device were presented at this stage. After describing the discovery inside the Tesla, Detective Joshua Byers walked the court through the digital investigation that followed. Over the course of the investigation, detectives obtained search warrants for records from Apple, Tesla, Amazon, AT&T, Uber, Postmates, Home Depot, and several other companies. Byers testified that investigators also analyzed several terabytes of iCloud data using Cellebrite, a forensic software commonly used to examine digital evidence. According to the testimony, investigators reviewed emails, connected devices, photographs, account activity, and other digital records to build a timeline of events. One device discussed in court was an iPhone associated with the iCloud account, falloit0012@gmail.com. The phone was identified by the device name Tranquilizer, and records showed that it had previously connected to Burke's Tesla. The court also heard testimony about about data recovered directly from the Tesla itself. Navigation records showed trips and charging activity linked to locations including Santa Barbara, Lake Cachuma, and the Santa Ynez Valley during May 2025. Investigators also presented surveillance footage from July 29, 2025. Detective Byers testified that the footage showed Burke's black Tesla traveling on Doheny Drive before he was later seen on camera walking back toward his residence. Another point raised during testimony involved Burke's primary cell phone. Byers testified that investigators determined Burke's iPhone 16 Pro Max had last disconnected from the Tesla on July 29, 2025. That phone has still not been recovered. The hearing also covered how investigators identified the victim. After news reports revealed that human remains had been found inside the Tesla, Celeste's father contacted the Los Angeles Police Department because he feared the remains could belong to his daughter. He provided detectives with the name of Celeste's dentist, and dental records were ultimately used by the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner to confirm her identity. Celeste's father also told investigators that she had used 2 known cell phone numbers and that she had been given a third phone by an unidentified male. During the search, investigators also recovered what they described as a burn box, an item Detective Byers compared to a small crematorium designed to reduce material to ash. Records presented in court indicated the item had been purchased through Amazon using an alias that investigators also linked to several other purchases discussed during the hearing. Inside the home, investigators recovered a desktop computer, multiple electronic devices, and a light blue iPhone 15. Detective Byers testified that investigators identified the phone as belonging to Burke based on selfies, credit cards, and other personal information stored on the device. The search also uncovered travel records that investigators had obtained during the investigation, including airline tickets purchased for both Burke and Celeste on trips from Los Angeles to Texas and Los Angeles to London. On the second day of the hearing, former Mogul Vision finance director Benjamin Greger was questioned about those travel arrangements. Greger testified that he never discussed the London trip with Burke's mother or Mogul Vision executive Josh Marshall. However, he acknowledged that he later asked Burke's manager Robert Morgenroth whether reports about Burke traveling to London with Celeste were true. Greger also testified that he later learned the airline tickets for that London trip appeared to have been purchased through one of Burke's personal financial accounts rather than an account managed by Mogul Vision. Greger's testimony also offered insight into how Burke's finances were managed. He told the court that nearly all of Burke's business finances were handled by his mother, Colleen Burke, and that Burke himself rarely discussed how much money he was earning. However, Greger acknowledged that Burke did maintain at least one personal financial account outside of Mogul Vision's management. The hearing then shifted to testimony from Louis Poimaru, Vice President of Finance at Interscope Records. He walked the court through Burke's recorded entertainment earnings, stating that they totaled approximately $950,000 in 2022 and around $3.87 million in 2023. The testimony also explained how portions of those earnings were distributed through different entities, including a California Coogan Trust created for child performers. After presenting the digital evidence, Detective Joshua Byers introduced another part of the investigation, a timeline of purchases that investigators tracked through Amazon, Home Depot, Lowe's, Uber, and Postmates records. Rather than focusing on a single item, investigators placed these purchases in chronological order to show what they believe was an important sequence of events. The earliest purchase discussed in court was made on April 24, 2025, when a shovel was ordered from Home Depot through Postmates. Byers testified that investigators considered this one of the significant purchases identified during the investigation. About a week later, on May 1st, 2 chainsaws were purchased through an Amazon account associated with Travion Davis. One was a red and black 16-inch chainsaw, while the other was a smaller pink and black handheld chainsaw. During his testimony, Byers confirmed that both of those chainsaws were later recovered from Burke's garage during the September 2025 search of the residence. On the second day of the hearing, LAPD criminalist Lauren Wallace testified about the forensic examination of those chainsaws. She confirmed that both were subjected to presumptive blood testing, but neither produced a positive result for blood. During cross-examination, the defense also highlighted that no additional DNA testing was performed on the chainsaws after those initial results. The timeline continued with another purchase on May 3rd, when an inflatable pool was ordered through the same Amazon account and delivered to the Doheny drive home. Wallace also testified about several items recovered during the search of the residence that investigators documented as part of their forensic examination. These included the inflatable pool, 2 green tarps, multiple garbage bags filled with wipes showing brown-colored stains, and rubber floor mats from the garage that displayed several long linear cuts. Samples were collected from reddish stains found on some of those items for further laboratory analysis. The following day, May 4th, investigators traced 2 more purchases. A Makita chainsaw was ordered through Home Depot using Uber and Postmates records, and a Libman mop system, including a bucket and spin mop, was purchased from Lowe's. Then came May 5th, a date that featured 2 additional purchases. The first was a cadaver body bag labeled City Morgue, ordered through Amazon and delivered to the same address. Investigators also identified the purchase of a heavy-duty laundry bag, which was delivered on the same day. The timeline didn't end there. Investigators testified that another item entered the timeline on July 7th, when records showed the purchase of a burn cage. Although investigators documented the burn cage during the search of Burke's home, testimony presented in court revealed that the item itself was not collected for forensic testing. During cross-examination, the defense questioned that decision, while investigators explained that it had been photographed and documented during the search. A few days later, on July 12th, a fireproof burn mat was also purchased through an Amazon account associated with Travian Davis. Rather than presenting these purchases as isolated transactions, investigators organized them into a chronological sequence that became part of the overall timeline introduced during today's hearing. As the hearing continued, the discussion moved beyond the purchases themselves. Attention shifted to the forensic examination of the recovered items, where both the prosecution and the defense focused on what laboratory testing revealed, and in some cases, what testing was never performed. When the prosecution finished presenting its timeline, the defense shifted the focus of the hearing from what investigators found to how the investigation itself was conducted. Defense attorney Blair Burke questioned Detective Joshua Byers about several pieces of evidence, arguing that some items were either not preserved or were never fully tested. The first issue involved the black cadaver bag, in which Celeste's remains were discovered. Byers testified that investigators decided not to preserve the entire bag because of its condition. After consulting with a supervisor and a criminalist, detectives removed only certain portions of the bag, including the zipper and handles, for forensic testing. The remainder of the bag was not retained. He also confirmed that the discarded portions were not fingerprinted, swabbed for DNA, or subjected to additional forensic testing. The defense then turned to the burn cage that investigators found inside Burke's home. Byers testified that the unopened box was photographed during the search and located near a piano on the second floor of the residence. However, he acknowledged that it was never tested for biological evidence and was not collected as evidence during the September 2025 search. Attention then shifted to the 3 chainsaws recovered from the property. The following day, LAPD criminalist Lauren Wallace expanded on that testimony. She confirmed that the 2 chainsaws recovered from the garage both produced negative presumptive results for blood. Wallace also explained that investigators documented several other items recovered from the residence, including garage floor mats with multiple linear cuts, green tarps, garbage bags containing stained wipes, and an inflatable pool, all of which became part of the forensic examination. According to Byers, investigators tested all 3 chainsaws for blood, and every test came back negative. When asked whether detectives performed DNA testing or compared the blades to the cut marks found on the victim's remains, Byers testified that he did not recall any DNA testing being conducted. He also confirmed that investigators did not pursue additional forensic comparisons after the initial blood test produced negative results. The defense also questioned the ownership of a light blue iPhone 15 recovered during the search of Burke's home. During direct examination, Byers testified that investigators identified the phone as Burke's because it contained selfies, credit cards, and other personal information linked to him. During cross-examination, however, Burke referred to an earlier search warrant affidavit connected to Celeste's iCloud account and questioned whether investigators had previously linked that same phone to Celeste instead. After reviewing the affidavit in court, Byers testified that the document referred to Celeste's email account, not ownership of the phone itself. itself. The exchange became one of the more tense moments of the hearing, with prosecutors objecting that the questioning had become argumentative before the judge instructed both sides to move on. By the end of the cross-examination, the defense had highlighted several areas where it believes the investigation left unanswered questions, not by disputing that evidence existed, but by challenging whether every available forensic step had been taken. By the end of the second day of testimony, a clear pattern had begun to emerge. Prosecutors continued building a detailed investigative timeline through forensic evidence, digital records, and witness testimony, while the defense concentrated on the methods investigators used to collect, preserve, and analyze that evidence. Those competing approaches are likely to remain central as the preliminary hearing continues. By the end of the first 2 days of testimony, the court had heard far more than a basic overview of the investigation. Detectives, forensic specialists, and financial witnesses had each added another layer to the timeline, giving the public its most detailed look yet at the evidence presented in court. The prosecution's presentation followed a clear timeline. It began with the 2024 welfare check, moved to the discovery of Celeste's remains inside Burke's Tesla in September 2025, and then expanded into the digital records, search warrants, and purchases investigators spent months collecting and analyzing. The second day expanded that picture even further. The court heard testimony about forensic examinations of Burke's Tesla and residence, laboratory testing performed on evidence collected during the search, financial records connected to Burke's career, and additional witness testimony that helped explain how investigators pieced together different parts of the case. The hearing also provided a better understanding of just how much digital evidence investigators gathered. Rather than relying on a single source, detectives combined records from Apple, Tesla, Amazon, AT&T, Uber, Postmates, Home Depot, Lowe's, surveillance footage, and other electronic data to reconstruct the timeline presented in court. At the same time, the defense made it equally clear what its strategy is likely to be moving forward. Instead of focusing on the overall timeline, defense attorneys concentrated on the details of the investigation itself. Their questions centered on evidence that was never preserved, forensic testing that was not performed, and whether investigators reached conclusions before exhausting every available avenue of examination. Those arguments are expected to remain a major part of the case as the preliminary hearing continues. Several additional witnesses are still expected to testify as the hearing continues, meaning the evidence presented so far represents only part of the prosecution's overall case. Future testimony may provide further context, introduce new evidence, or address questions that remain unresolved after the first 2 days. It's also important to remember where the case stands procedurally. A preliminary hearing is not a trial, and it is not where guilt or innocence is decided. The purpose of these proceedings is for the judge to determine whether the prosecution has presented enough evidence for the case to move forward to trial. That decision has not yet been made, and many witnesses have yet to testify. Today's hearing was only the beginning. Over the coming days, the court is expected to hear additional testimony, examine more evidence, and continue building the record that will ultimately determine whether this case proceeds to a full jury trial. As those proceedings continue, each hearing will likely answer some questions while raising new ones. We'll continue following every major development and break down each day's testimony as new evidence is presented in court. Until then, thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful and want continued coverage of this case as it unfolds, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next update.